The diner had just begun to stir awake when the boy first came in. It was one of those mornings when the air outside still carried the damp bite of dawn, the kind that made people hunch their shoulders and shuffle quickly toward warmth. Maria was refilling coffee cups, moving with the easy rhythm of someone who had worked the morning shift for years. That was when she noticed him, small, thin, maybe 12 at most. He pushed open the glass door slowly, as if unsure he was even allowed inside, and stood for a moment just past the threshold. His shoes were worn to threads, his laces dragging like tired snakes on the tile floor. His backpack looked too heavy for his narrow frame, sagging against his back as if it carried not books but burdens. He glanced around the room, wary of the laughter from the booth of truckers near the window, wary of the cook's booming voice behind the grill. His gaze landed on the corner booth, half hidden, tucked away, and he slid into it quickly, keeping his head down. Maria, wiping her hands on her apron, watched him pretend to study the menu. His fingers traced the edges of the laminated page, but he didn't turn it, didn't really read it. Instead, he let his eyes hover on the cheapest items, the small stack of toast, the black coffee, the side of fries. When she walked over, he didn't meet her eyes. "Just water, please," he whispered, his voice barely more than a rasp. Maria felt her chest tighten. She had seen people order nothing but coffee before, but water. That wasn't an order, that was a plea not to be noticed. "Sure thing," she said gently, and walked back toward the counter. But instead of just pouring water, she reached for a plate. A scoop of scrambled eggs, 2 slices of toast, and a strip of bacon she knew the cook wouldn't miss. She set the plate down in front of him as casually as she could, like it was nothing. "On the house, kiddo," she said, giving him a wink. He stared at the food, his lips parting in surprise, then looked up at her with a flicker of hesitation, as though he wasn't sure if this was a trick. But hunger won. He picked up his fork and ate like someone who hadn't tasted warmth in days, each bite careful, as though afraid it might vanish if he moved too fast. Maria turned back to her other tables, but her eyes kept sliding to him. She didn't know his name, didn't know his story. All she knew was that she couldn't stand to see a child starving in silence. Days folded into one another, and soon the boy's presence in the diner became as natural as the hiss of the coffee machine or the clink of cutlery against plates. He arrived almost every morning, always at the same time, slipping in quietly through the glass door with that same hesitant step, like someone testing if the world would allow him in today. He went straight to the corner booth, never choosing another spot. That booth became his place, his little island, and Maria noticed how even the regulars began to leave it open, as though the boy had claimed it without ever speaking. He never ordered more than water, sometimes coffee if he had a crumpled bill tucked deep in his pocket, but Maria never let him sit empty-handed. She began to anticipate his arrival, preparing something before he even sat down. A stack of pancakes one day, a grilled cheese sandwich wrapped in parchment another, a warm bowl of soup when the mornings turned colder. She slid the plates onto his table with an easy smile, never making a fuss, never drawing attention. "The cook made too much," she would say, or, "somebody canceled their order." It was their unspoken game, her way of protecting his pride. The boy didn't talk much, but Maria began to learn him in silence. He lingered over his food, stretching out each bite as if making it last longer. He always kept one eye on the door, tensing whenever someone new entered, like a stray who had learned to flinch before kindness. His clothes were always the same, washed out and frayed, and his backpack seemed to grow heavier each day. When Maria passed by, she sometimes caught him staring out the window, lost in thought, his face older than a child's should ever be. The other waitresses teased her lightly. "You've got yourself a little stray," one said with a grin, but Maria brushed it off. She knew what hunger looked like, what loneliness sounded like. She remembered the hollow nights of her own childhood, when cupboards were bare and kindness rare. Maybe that was why she felt pulled to him. She didn't ask questions about where he lived, why he always came alone, why he seemed so guarded. She feared questions might send him running. So she gave him what she could. Food, warmth, a smile that said he was seen. Sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, he slipped half his sandwich into his backpack, saving it for later. That quiet act, that small piece of survival, told her everything she needed to know. That morning the diner hummed with its usual rhythm, the sizzle of bacon on the grill, the murmur of tired workers clutching coffee, the low notes of an old jukebox humming in the corner. Maria moved from table to table, balancing plates with practiced ease, but her eyes kept drifting to the boy. He was already seated in his booth, his small frame dwarfed by the cracked vinyl cushions. A piece of toast sat untouched in front of him. Instead of eating, he stared at the doorway, his fingers drumming lightly against the table, his shoulders tight. Maria frowned. He was different today. Normally, the sight of food softened him, pulling him briefly out of whatever storm he carried. But now he looked restless, like a rabbit sensing a fox nearby. She brought him a plate of pancakes with extra syrup, setting it down gently. "Eat, kiddo. They're best while warm," she said with a smile. He nodded, but his eyes flicked past her toward the diner's entrance again. It wasn't the first time she had noticed. Every day, he kept watch on the door. Sometimes, when groups of strangers came in, he would shrink back against the booth, as though trying to disappear. At first Maria thought it was shyness, but lately she wondered if it was something more. He looked too young to carry that much fear, too practiced at hiding. She wanted to ask him, to lean down and say, "Who are you running from?" But she stopped herself. She knew the rules of fragile trust. You don't push, you don't pry. If he wanted to speak, he would, in his own time. So she stayed with what she knew: food, kindness, silence. She refilled his cup before it was empty, slipped him a wrapped sandwich when she thought no one was looking, and pressed a hand briefly on his shoulder as if to say, "You're safe here." Her coworkers noticed her attention, of course. One of the cooks grinned and muttered, "Mother Teresa's at it again," when she packed an extra muffin into the boy's bag. Maria ignored them. She could feel something in her bones, that this boy wasn't just hungry for food. He was hungry for safety, for proof that someone, anyone, cared whether he showed up the next morning. And yet, as she watched him that morning, eyes fixed on the glass door, body tense with silent dread, Maria felt a prickle of unease crawl up her spine. Something, or someone, was coming. The morning began like any other, but Maria would remember it as the moment her world shifted. The diner was buzzing more than usual, regulars filling the booths, the clatter of dishes, the hiss of the fryer. Outside, the sun had barely lifted above the rooftops, its light cutting sharp angles across the parking lot. Maria was pouring coffee for a pair of construction workers when the low growl of engines broke through the hum. It wasn't the sound of one car, or even two, it was a convoy. 4 black SUVs pulled up in a perfect line, their windows tinted so dark they looked like mirrors swallowing the morning light. Conversation inside faltered, forks hovered mid-air, and heads turned toward the wide glass windows. The doors of the SUVs opened in unison, and men stepped out, all of them tall, dressed in dark suits that seemed too sharp, too deliberate for this small-town diner. Their movements were precise, controlled, like soldiers trained to work as one. The air inside shifted, heavy with the weight of curiosity and fear. Maria's heart sank before she even turned her head. The boy, he was frozen in his booth, his toast abandoned, his wide eyes glued to the door. His small hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles had gone white. For the first time since she'd met him, Maria saw real fear, raw and unhidden, etched across his face. She didn't think, she acted. She moved to his booth, sliding herself between him and the entrance, her body a barrier as if her apron and tired hands could shield him from whatever storm had just arrived. The bell above the door jingled, light and cheery, but it was swallowed instantly by the heavy steps of the men entering. The diner had gone silent, the only sound the faint crackle of bacon on the grill. The tallest man, broad-shouldered and commanding, reached into his jacket. Maria's breath caught, her heart thudding so loudly she thought the boy could hear it. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a badge, silver, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He held it up just long enough for the whole room to see. "We've been looking for him," the man said, his voice steady, resonant. He nodded toward the boy, whose trembling frame seemed smaller than ever. Then his gaze shifted, locking onto Maria with startling intensity. And for the woman who made sure he was never forgotten. Gasps rippled through the diner. Maria felt the boy's eyes on her, wide and searching, as though waiting for her to explain what even she did not understand. In that charged silence, Maria realized the truth. Whatever secret this boy carried, she was now part of it, and nothing would ever be the same again.